Hi there. It is Saturday, so it's movie night, and I'm here to present another quarantine quadruple feature. Just finished our 14th week of quarantine. In fact, tomorrow marks my 100th day that I've been hiding away from the world. On Monday, there was a landmark decision from the Supreme Court ruling transgender people are no longer allowed to be fired just because they're transgender. Gay people can't be fired based off of their sexual orientation. This is so monumental that you would have already assumed that this was a thing, but it wasn't in several states. You could still basically discriminate against your employees, and no longer. So that was a pretty great way to start the week and to continue celebrating Gay Pride Month. And we're going to continue that right here with our Quarantine Quadruple feature. We are going to be discussing queer horror. Today, I'm actually going to make a ton of recommendations. So if you want some good queer horror to watch through the rest of Pride Month, I'm going to make a ton of recommendations. Of course, there's only 4 that we're going to be fully analyzing, that we're going to really dive into. I'm going to talk about a lot of other films along the way, and we're going to do it chronologically. So we're going to start from some of the earliest up until today. So when I was talking about programming a night of queer horror, Gina said, well, what are you going to program? And I said, I want to screen Bride of Frankenstein. And she was like, oh, how is that a gay movie? And it's a good question, because there's no explicitly gay characters in the film, technically. That's because in the 1930s, there was something called the Hays Code. It was written in 1930, and then it got implemented in like 1934, I think. And it ran up until the mid to late 60s, the Hays Code. It's also known as the Production Code. And this was basically a series of guidelines to keep the morality of your viewers strong. So by today's standards, they're very antiquated. For example, it was like if you had a criminal in one of your movies, they had to be punished by the end of the film. So typically that meant they were like getting gunned down in the street. Oftentimes the endings wouldn't really fit the film. They were just tacked on. That way they could make a gangster movie. So there's a lot of gangster movies like that. Like Scarface is a really famous example. The original Scarface by Howard Hawks, not the Brian De Palma film with Al Pacino. They couldn't really glorify this bad guy, but they kind of have this character that you follow for the whole movie, and he's a bad guy, but it's a very compelling character study of a bad guy. But then they have to just tack on this moral ending where he gets punished, and those types of movies usually end with like the hero, who's a guy who isn't really in the film that much, clutching a woman in the street, and they're like, it's all over now. And it's like, what, you're trying to tell us those were the main protagonists of the movie? No, it was the villain. But that's how the Hays Code went. If you wanted to release certain movies, you had to follow those guidelines. And there was nothing specifically mentioned in the Hays Code about sexual orientation. However, it did say, and I'm paraphrasing, that you couldn't really pervert the idea of sexual acts or sexual orientation. So in the 30s, homosexuality was most commonly viewed as a mental disorder. So you couldn't have your characters represented as gay because that was not a healthy mindset for the audience. So there are gay characters, as the Hays Code is a thing, but they're implied. They're not explicitly saying, I'm a gay character, but you can infer from a lot of the films that there are, in fact, gay characters. And Bride of Frankenstein, which is going to be oh shit, I drop my movies a lot when I'm doing this. I swear I love my movie collection, but I'm a bit of a klutz. That was actually just some papers. And this one has a character named Dr. Pretorius, and he's very much a gay character, even though it doesn't say he specifically is. He persuades Dr. Frankenstein to come join him in creating another Frankenstein-type creature. In fact, he woos him away from his wife on his wedding day. And James Whale, who made Bride of Frankenstein, was an out filmmaker. He was gay. And that's really astonishing to me, because he was one of the best filmmakers that was working in the 30s, and he was out. He wasn't hiding it. And you see so many actors and people in the film and television industry and the music industry and sports that never come out because they're afraid it's going to negatively affect them in their line of business. So the fact that there was a guy doing that in the 1930s is really amazing to me, and he made some terrific films. Of course, he made, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, The Old Dark House, and his crowning achievement, in my opinion, Bride of Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein is also really great because it is the earliest film I can think of that sort of delves into camp. There's some silliness in it. It's a little campy. It's quirky. It's very strange. And campiness is something that is really embraced by certain aspects of the gay community. In fact, there are films that have become synonymous with being gay films, even though they don't have anything to do with sexuality. Movies like Mommy Dearest, Showgirls, or even last year's Cats. Those movies are kind of rejected by mainstream audiences because they're quote-unquote bad. They're over the top, they're silly, they're campy. We can't take them seriously as movies. So they're kind of rejected. And then the gay community is like, we'll take these movies. We love them for what they are. They're now camp classics. Bride of Frankenstein never delves that far into camp. You can't really argue that it's a bad movie because it's a brilliant movie, and the camp never really goes over the top, but it definitely kind of flirts with these silly, fun ideas, and I can't think of a movie, this was 1935, I can't think of a movie that had really done that before that. So James Whale was very ahead of his time as a filmmaker. I was really on the fence about screening, instead of Bride of Frankenstein, a movie called Gods and Monsters, but this is very much not a horror film, but it's about James Whale late in his life, played by Sir Ian McKellen, giving a very lovely performance. And it also stars Brendan Fraser giving the best performance of his life as well. And it's basically James Whale's last love affair. It's based on a terrific novel called Father of Frankenstein, and it's basically a fictional retelling of the last days of James Whale. It's not specifically based off of a true event in his life, but it's kind of an imagined event, and it's a really beautiful book. And I did want to focus more on horror today, but I also recommend checking out Gods and Monsters. So the Hays Code really fucked with films in the 30s and 40s with not being able to have explicitly gay characters, but there were a number of films that did have these implied gay characters. In 1936, there was Dracula's Daughter, which is the first direct sequel to the original Dracula. His daughter is a vampire, and she goes and she's seducing other women. There's a lot of lesbian vampire movies. In fact, I had to make it a point that we were only going to screen one gay vampire movie today. There's so many gay vampire movies. And one of the earliest examples of vampires in literature is Carmilla, which was written in 1872, I think. So it predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by 26 years. And Carmilla is a lesbian vampire, which has kind of become an archetype through horror history. And you see it recurring a lot in films. We've actually watched a few other, what could be argued gay vampire movies. The Lost Boys, Fright Night, We Are the Night has some lesbian vampires as well. Interview with the Vampire, starring two of the most beautiful men in Hollywood, and they're living together as vampires, and they're trying to raise a more or less adopted daughter together. This one has some very homoerotic subtext as well. The Hunger, Tony Scott's terrific art house lesbian vampire horror film, starring Susan Sarandon and David Bowie, is also a wonderful lesbian vampire movie. The Vampire Lovers, which is a Hammer horror film. This one is loosely based off of Carmilla as well, which has been adapted a number of times. But this one is a very erotic film. I saw this relatively recently, and it's very sexy. Some of these vampires are just some of the most beautiful creatures you've ever seen put on film. I'm surprised more people have not gotten into Hammer horror. This was a film company that was making a lot of horror films in the 60s and 70s. And it seems today that a lot of people are really into period pieces, shows like Downton Abbey and The Queen or whatever. I don't really watch any of these shows, but it seems like that's kind of comfort food for a lot of people to just sit back and watch these type of period pieces with lush production design and costumes that's what Hammer horror is, except they're horror films, which is also very popular right now. So I'm really surprised that more people have not dived into Hammer horror. And they're all fairly sexual, but this one is the most explicitly sexual Hammer horror film I've seen, Vampire Lovers. So definitely recommend checking that one out. So a lot of gay vampire movies, and we're going to be talking about one at length a little bit later, but more about films from the 30s and 40s, kind of how they represented gay people. It was often just like the other, the person that's dead or a monster or something like that, like Cat People. It could really be argued to be an early queer horror film because she keeps rejecting physical contact from a man, or it's gonna like turn her into a monster. And a lot of people argue that the movie really focuses on like lesbian sexual desires. The Uninvited, the other in this, it's a ghost story, is a guy's dead sister who's haunting a house, and it's kind of implied that she was a lesbian. The Uninvited is actually a really terrific film. Cat People is as well. Hitchcock's film Rebecca has one of the biggest queer icon lesbians in cinema history, Mrs. Danvers, who's the housekeeper of the house. She's obsessed with Rebecca. I actually saw this last year in the theater on a 35 millimeter nitrate print. If you don't know much about film projection, most films were released on celluloid, right? So they were flammable, but then there were also nitrate prints. They were black and white movies, but they were so much sharper, and the blacks were deeper and they were more beautiful, and nitrate prints were even more flammable. So today there are very few theaters that can actually project nitrate prints because it's really easy to have a fire started in the projection booth. And as you know from Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, once film starts catching fire, it burns very, very fast, and it's hard to maintain those fires. So while I was watching Rebecca, it was doubly exciting because it was like, oh, I love this movie and I'm seeing it on a nitrate print. And also, is this theater going to burn down? And it didn't. But Rebecca has a notoriously lesbian character as well. And Diabolique, which is a terrific film by Henri Georges Clouzot. And again, it's not mentioned that the two women are lesbians, but they're clearly having a relationship with each other as they plot to kill one of their husbands. The Hammer horror film Frankenstein Created Woman deals with a lesbian character as well. A film that is a little more overt about it is from 1963, I believe, Robert Wise's The Haunting. Theodora is a lesbian in the film. Now, in Shirley Jackson's brilliant novel, it's hinted at her sexuality. This movie is a lot more overt about it. This movie is pretty groundbreaking in that regard because it doesn't portray the lesbian as a villain. It doesn't portray her as crazy. It doesn't portray her as the way you commonly see gay people presented in horror films. It was just a woman, and she was feminine, and she was beautiful, and she was down to earth and normal. And even now, when you see a gay character in a film, if it's not specific to the story that the character is gay, the movie gets backlash from idiots online that are saying like, oh, of course this character is gay because they're trying to please modern audiences, but it didn't relate to the story at all. And it's just like, so what? Why can't it just be a gay character living their life in this movie? Like, if you see a black character in a movie and your first instinct is them being black better tie into this story, then you've got a fucking problem. But this movie didn't represent Theo in any crazy way. It was just a woman who happened to be a lesbian. That's unfortunately relatively groundbreaking because once the Hays Code was lifted in 1967, a lot of the horror films you'd see through the 70s and 80s, even up until the 90s, didn't present gay people in the best light. And unfortunately, a lot of these movies have like a twist reveal that shows that they are transgendered, or that they are gay, or that they were dressed up like a little girl when they were kids, and that's what drove them to kill today. So it's sort of a problematic viewing on how we are seeing people in the LGBTQ community as monsters. So films like, and I'm gonna spoil some of the twists on some of these movies. I'm really against spoilers usually. However, I do think that knowing that there is a stupid reveal in these films makes it easier for us to dive into them and examine why we are presenting these characters as someone to be scared of. So a great example, Sleepaway Camp. It's actually one of my favorite movies. It has a very shocking ending that is kind of showing people in a certain light that's not that flattering. Dressed to Kill, same thing. Psycho is probably the granddaddy of films revealing sexual confusion as a way to be driven crazy into murder. Basic Instinct was really protested for its portrayal of a bisexual woman who was murdering people. Silence of the Lambs, probably the least problematic of all of these movies, but Buffalo Bill is certainly represented as a very fucked up character. Not to say that gay people can't be super fucked up and murder people. However, if that's the only way you're choosing to show them in a movie that could be seen in kind of a negative light, Cruising, William Friedkin's really wonderful film. We're going to talk at length about this on another day. But this one also shows a lot of gay people getting murdered by a gay guy. So the fact that we were kind of seeing these other types of people that we didn't normally see presented in films that frequently being presented in such a negative light is a problem. Do I think these movies should be canceled? Absolutely not. But I do think looking at them from a modern lens can kind of help us shed some light on why we were viewing them this way in the first place. And it also kind of begs the question, if we're seeing these people represented in these films, and then it turns out that they are bad, murderers, crazy, is that still solid representation in a movie? Or does that make the movie bad? So there's a lot of differing opinions on this. I think almost all of those movies were heavily protested by gay organizations when they came out for the way they were presenting people. On the other hand, these films, as well as Pieces, that was a slasher film that was a similar way. These films, they are representing a portion of the community that we don't typically see. So I don't know, I'm torn on it. And there's another one as well that we're going to talk about a little bit later. That's one we're actually going to be watching tonight. But I'll talk about that when we get to the films of the 2000s. So some other films that don't portray homosexuality in a negative light. We need to talk about Clive Barker. Clive Barker is a horror legend. He has written so many short stories and novels, and he made 3 movies. And 2 of them can really be argued as seminal gay works of horror cinema. Of course, he did Hellraiser, which is all about a Cenobite who's trying to lure people over to the dark side, and they are all bondagey, and it's all about whips and chains and sadomasochism and torture. And the movies are very sexual when you look at them in that light. Of course, that's all kind of like subtext, but Clive Barker is one of the biggest gay voices in the horror community, but he's such a strong presence in horror, and he's really an icon. He's a huge influence of mine. I really love Clive Barker. I have a friend, Will, who works with him, and he told Clive Barker about me, and Clive Barker drew this demon for me. To Paul, love Clive, and I have this framed on my office wall, so this is fucking awesome. Thank you, Will. I love Clive Barker. But I want to talk more about another one of his films, Nightbreed. Nightbreed, again, it doesn't explicitly say any of these characters are gay, but the messages in this one are kind of a lot more overt. It's basically about a guy who's kind of questioning everything about his life. He's really struggling a lot with his identity, and he finds this group of monsters, this group of others that welcome him in, and they say, hey, it's okay to be different, it's okay to be a freak, we live our own lives, we support each other when the outside world doesn't understand us. And that can very obviously be taken as a gay community. And then there is a siege on their community from people with assault rifles, a bunch of uneducated rednecks that think the way of life of these monsters is going to infringe on their own way of life, and they need to go stop this threat. So a lot of the imagery that you'll see in this film of what looks like a protest being infiltrated by a violent group with assault rifles is very timely for right now. But I actually really like Nightbreed, and I really think there's some strong messages of inclusion and positivity in this film from the the monster community. Seed of Chucky is the 5th Child's Play movie. Chucky and Tiffany have a baby, and it's it's a little doll, and this doll really questions its gender. It does not know where it belongs. It doesn't know what it thinks, and it's actually a pretty arguably healthy representation of a character who's really struggling with something like that. Don Mancini is a gay writer and filmmaker. He actually wrote all of the Child's Play movies except the newest reboot, and he directed Seed of Chucky as well. So I actually think this one very interestingly delves into some LGBTQ issues. Paranorman, this has a gay character, a horror film for kids, but I think that one's great as well. So a couple other films, they're not technically horror films. They're kind of like fringe horror films. They're like right on this at the outskirts. But Heavenly Creatures has a pair of very young lesbians that are driven to go do something very, very terrible in New Zealand. This is based off of a true story. It's one of Kate Winslet's earliest roles. It's a Peter Jackson film, and it's really quite terrific. Another true crime movie that I love a lot is Monster, featuring Charlize Theron's dynamic performance, one of the best performances of all time, as Eileen Wuornos, who is a prostitute that starts murdering her Johns after she is abused by a couple of these guys. She's like, well, fuck them all. I'm going to start killing them. She's also involved in a relationship with Christina Ricci in this movie, which is actually quite a lovely relationship. The Duke of Burgundy. You know what? If you don't do horror, if you're scared by horror, but you still want some like good lesbian content, The Duke of Burgundy is a Peter Strickland film, and he usually does kind of horror-themed stuff. So this one is kind of on the fringe if you can consider it a horror film, but it has a very complicated, interesting lesbian relationship. So we're going to go back to the 80s for our second movie that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about, of course, you've probably already anticipated this one, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. This, I would say, is probably the most famous gay horror film of all time. There's scenes that take place in S&M bars. There's a scene where a character gets killed by in a shower by towels tying him up and like a towel whipping his ass. So this movie was really unfairly maligned when it came out. And that's because people were so focused on the fact that it was a gay movie and like, oh, that kid is gay. Also, it kind of subverts some of the rules that were established in part 1. And arguably that is sort of an issue that the movie has. It presents Freddy in the real world, not so much in the dream world. It's Freddy trying to manifest himself through this kid. But the movie has had a real resurgence in the past few years, and people have really started embracing it because of all the gay subtext, which you can't even call it subtext anymore because it's so overt. And there's a new documentary on Shudder called Scream Queen, which is about the actor who plays the lead in this movie and how this film, for better or worse, changed his entire life because he couldn't really get roles after this. He was kind of seen as like the gay kid that ruined the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. It is very interesting to kind of see, even in the 80s, how audiences responded to seeing gay content in their film franchises. Our other two movies that we're going to be examining tonight, from 2003, Alexander Aja's High Tension. I'm going to have to talk a little bit about this one. I do think it's a very strong horror film. The first time I watched High Tension, when you first start seeing characters getting killed, the way Alexander Aja directs violence was very specific. And that sounds really strange, but there's a few filmmakers, when you watch the movie, even if you don't know it's their movie, the way they film their violent scenes, it's specific to their style. Okay, so Paul Verhoeven, when you see the violence in his films, especially movies like RoboCop or Starship Troopers, a very specific brand of violence. Quentin Tarantino's violence is very specific to him as a filmmaker, and I feel like Alexander Aja's is as well. So this is one of those movies that presents a lesbian in sort of a problematic light. Here's why we're going to watch it. For most of the movie, it's just a lesbian character, and that doesn't really have anything to do with the plotline, and I think that's good to just have that representation. This movie also has a terrible twist ending. Just the worst. Doesn't make any fucking sense. No one's going to watch that twist and be like, wow, that was amazing. You're going to watch that and be like, that was a real hack move. If you can get over the twist, which I have, and I appreciate the movie for what it is, I don't think that twist in the film is very thought out, because it sort of undoes everything you see before it. Since I think the twist is so not thought out, I honestly don't think there was any malicious intent to portray a lesbian in a negative light. So I prefer to just kind of ignore the ending and look at the rest of the film, which does have like kind of a strong kick-ass heroine at the core of the movie, with a very misguided ending. But the other reason I want to talk about high tension, kind of beyond the sexual politics of the film, is because this is a French movie, and it was part of the new French extremity wave. So this was a group of films that were released predominantly from like the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s to around 2010. And these are basically films that present sex or violence in the most extreme way possible. And I would say that the French extremity wave started with the earliest film you could argue would be a part of that, would be 1992's Man Bites Dog, but you really started seeing them coming out in the late 90s and early 2000s. Gaspar Noé, Irreversible, is one of the famous ones. Claire Denis's Trouble Every Day. Some of these movies were really making Americans pause and look at France and go, damn, what the fuck are they doing over there? What's really crazy is American cinema has always been quite violent, so there's never really been like what's been considered a film movement in America centered around how violent our movies are, because they always are. But it's not until another country starts almost mimicking American styles of films, like the way we make horror films or torture porn or something like that. When France started doing it, we raised our eyebrows and we were like, damn, they're really extreme. Really, they were just kind of making movies almost like Americans make, except a little more explicit with the sex. So Alexandre Aja is one of the biggest voices of the French New Extremity wave. There were some other horror films that were as noteworthy as High Tension. Inside is really brilliant. Martyrs is one of the very famous ones. But High Tension was one of the ones that made a big splash here in America. We're going to wrap up with, I said we were going to talk about and show one gay vampire movie, and I really had to narrow it down, but I went with everyone's favorite little genderqueer vampire in Let the Right One In. Eli is a vampire that moves next door to Oscar, a bullied boy, and they're both like 12 years old, and they start a relationship. This is a Swedish film, and I saw this when it came out, and my friend Christy took me to go see it. She had already seen it, and she was like, oh, you gotta go see this horror film. If you know anything about mine and Christy's relationship, I'm obsessed with horror films. She's scared of everything, so the fact that she's the one who took me to see this is really crazy when I look back on it. So it delves into the kind of history of her gender a lot more in the novel that it's based off of, but they touch on it here, where she was a boy and her genitals were removed, and Oscar's father is gay, and he goes on a trip and he visits his dad and his dad's lover, and Oscar is 12 and he's trying to kind of piece this relationship together and make it make sense in the context of his own relationship with this little vampire that he's kind of falling in love with. And it's very sweet and refreshing to see a film dealing with all of these subjects that are sometimes difficult for American films to examine. In fact, Let the Right One In was remade in America as Let Me In. And the movie pisses me off because it's really good, but it's such a straightforward adaptation that it's totally unnecessary, and it also strips away any of the sexual complexity that Let the Right One In has, which is what makes it such a compelling viewing experience. But we're definitely watching this one because of the way it deals with some of these subjects that so many people in the LGBTQ community have dealt with. So we are going to be wrapping it up on one of the best vampire movies ever filmed, Thomas Alfredson's Let the Right One In. So I know I just talked about a shitload of queer horror films. I threw a lot of recommendations at you, but most of them are films that I really love, whether they're complicated, whether they're not, whether they have a problematic portrayal of some of these characters, or whether it's just clear-cut and they're presented as the heroes and the good guys. I think all of these movies are worth discussing. All of them have something to offer. The problematic but very entertaining and pretty suspenseful High Tension by Alexander Aja. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Bride of Frankenstein, James Whale's masterpiece. As well as Let the Right One In, Swedish film, masterpiece by Thomas Alfredson. Those are the 4 films that we're going to be watching tonight. Happy Pride. Enjoy the screenings. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe.